Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Elaine Rayborn, and I'm from Sandia National Laboratories with the IDEAS Productivity Project. And along with my co-moderator, Ashley Barker from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, from the ECP project, we'd like to welcome you to the Strategies for Working Remotely, Making the Transition to Virtual Software Teams panel. And I'm really excited to have a panel discussion today on this topic. We have some fantastic panelists today who have also, with most of us, are making the transition from either co-located and dispersed or distributed teams to fully virtual teams. And so that's the topic today. So our panelists are JJ Billings from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Mark Gates from University of Tennessee, Mahantesh Halapanavar from PPNL, Angela Herring from Los Alamos National Laboratory, and Axel Hubel from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And so today, the way that we're going to actually structure the panel is we're going to actually be answering some questions after the panelists have about 3 to 5 minutes to talk about their situation. We're all from Department of Energy National Laboratories, with the exception of Mark, who's from the university. And we're all involved in the Exascale Computing Project. And as you know, that project is very heavily involved in solutions for COVID-19. And also, everyone is working currently from home or working remotely. And so that's why we started this panel series. Let's see. So after the panelists have an opportunity to speak, then we will enter into the Q&A portion of the discussion, and we encourage you to enter your questions into the Zoom chat, excuse me. There will be no Google Doc today. And then the slides and video and any resources that we talk about will be posted at the link that you see below. And so we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to invite JJ Billings to kick us off. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you very much, Elaine, and thank you to everyone who is joining us today. I'm very happy to be here. I think, like most of you, this is the first talk I've given in a while, but this is a new place to be. This is also the first time that I've spent 9 or 10 weeks at the same desk in quite a while. So this is a really interesting time, and in terms of advice that I would give, I would start off with advice to fellow managers, and kind of the number one thing that I've been saying is, you got to be willing to make a video call as quickly as you would to walk down the hall. Your people need you, and I understand the value of face-to-face interactions, and that you gain a lot more information through a face-to-face interaction. And a person-to-person interaction. You can get most of that with a video call, and it's much better to jump on that video call and to be there for your people than it is to not get on the call at all. So I've always been someone, I started using video conferencing software like way back, 20 some years ago. I met some people on the internet that had developed early prototypes, and I started testing it. So I've always been willing to jump in and try it out, but I really encourage other people to do the same, to be there for your people. But then for all of us, it's really important to focus on our mental health at a time like this, and to make sure that we take care of ourselves. There was a study, and actually it's funny, I saw the results at Christmas, so it was Christmas themed, about how trees can make you as happy as Christmas if you go for a walk in a forest. And in my case, I have a lot of trees in the backyard, but if you can go to a park, if you can go somewhere, just get outside and have some physical activity. But even if you can't do that, if there's no opportunity to do that, then talk to friends, talk to colleagues, just be there and connect either with nature or with other people. We get through times like this as a society by taking care of each other, and that's what we should still do. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the challenges that we've encountered as a group going to 100% remote. So what's been really interesting about this was that I was under the impression that my group was ready to go remote at any given time. And what we learned through this exercise was that most of the group could go and work from home for a day or two if we needed, but was the whole group ready to go remote for the whole time? And so that's been a transition for us. We learned some things that not everyone in our group had a home office. They do now. Some of them are makeshift. Some of them are the living room. And people didn't have desks. They didn't have gear. Poor internet connections have actually been a thing. And I was really surprised to find out that like my internet connection cuts out every time it rains. So I'm lucky that it's kind of a sunny day here now. We had all of those things that they were really interesting physical transition problems. And then kind of tying back to the first few bullets, we had new types of physical and mental stress that require new outlets, and they require us to adapt, and they require us to be there for each other. Physically, I mentioned, I've been in the same chair, same desk for 9 or 10 weeks now. And this is where I take my conference calls, and I can switch between conference calls so quickly that I might forget to get up and walk around. I might forget to get up and stretch. And this really wears your body out. I think we've all learned this now. And then the mental stress of being alone, kind of being in the same place all day. So we've learned to adapt to those things, but they're very challenging. One of the major unforeseen benefits that we've had is that our productivity has jumped. So if we look at our task tracker and the tickets and how our work has been going, we've actually been more productive. On some of our projects, that's been roughly, the productivity increase has been about a factor of 2, or roughly a factor of 2 over when we were in our offices. So that leads to a very interesting opportunity for us. How can we as a group adapt our culture so that we maximize our productivity to work from where we work best? In my case, working from home, I don't have an hour a day commute. I don't have travel between buildings at the laboratory, and I don't have transit between a lot of different meeting rooms. So I'm getting somewhere between an hour or 2 hours back a day to actually do more work, which is really quite nice. And it's the same for a lot of other people in the group. However, for others, it would still be better for them to go to their offices at the laboratory, because that's just where they work better. That's where they have places where they can get deeper focus and deeper into their work. So that's kind of what the outlook has been for the Research Software Engineering group at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And I'll turn it back over to Elaine.
Well, thank you, Jay. Later on, I'd like to hear more about more detail about how you're increasing your productivity. That sounds really interesting. Sounds like a lot of people on the call will have a lot of interest in that. So our next speaker is Mark. So Mark, we're looking forward to your comments. Thank you very much.
Hi, thanks, Elaine. Yeah, so I'm Mark Yates. I work at the Innovative Computing Laboratory at the University of Tennessee. And there I head up the SLATE team. So SLATE is an ECP project to develop the next generation of distributed dense linear algebra to replace ScaleUp. And I actually started managing this team fairly recently, just in October. So I only had a few months of managing it before then COVID sort of thrust us into this working remotely. So ICL is a research lab of about 50 people, and it's broken down into 3 large groups and then into smaller teams within those groups. So I'll talk some about my experience in the SLATE team, but then also the broader experience that we have within ICL. So my first piece of advice would be to work with multiple collaboration tools. Of course, we all have email. There's also Slack and Zoom and other platforms, whether other video conferencing platforms, and Google Docs. And these vary in the amount of asynchronicity, and they sort of apply for different kinds of communication. So I use email if I want longer communication that's going to be archived for a longer time period. But if I want just a short thing like I would just want to ask, a question or say, hey, can we have a meeting? I'll probably ask that on Slack, where we have more ephemeral kind of remarks on Slack. Or if we need to have a longer, more in-depth discussion, like a video conferencing thing seems to work much better for that. Google Docs is nice in that it's both synchronous and asynchronous. So we actually use this for meeting notes. And so we'll have Zoom for our video conferencing, but then everybody will have a Google Doc for the meeting notes open, and be able to, people can enter information into there while we're doing the meeting, and everybody sees the same thing. If there's links in there, they can click on those links and open them up in their local browsers. So that works really well. I actually also do, like, especially if I'm doing one-on-one meetings, having Zoom open along with Slack for chat. So I don't use the Zoom chat as much as I use the Slack chat, because then the chat will persist after the Zoom call is over, and Slack has more options for formatting and things like that. I'd echo remarks that JJ had about just checking in frequently, and that kind of replaces these informal hallway conversations that we'd have. And being on Slack, I can, if somebody has a question, we can then just jump into a Zoom call right away if we need to. A big challenge that we've had with COVID is that hiring is more difficult, particularly for international hires. We might want to hire somebody from Germany, but they literally can't come here to the United States. But that's also an opportunity to work with the university to try to develop some more flexible policies to enable remote work. So a really big unforeseen benefit that we had, and I'll have to credit Heike for observing this, is that local and remote team members are treated equally now. So previously we would have a group meeting and we might have 15 people around the table and 1 or 2 remote users that are zoomed in. So people that were remote were kind of left out of some of the local conversations. Now everybody's remote, and so everybody's on the same footing, and everybody can participate on a much more equal basis. So I think this is a good opportunity actually to learn all these tools and to just become more comfortable with working remotely, because we're going to continue even after we get back to campus or the labs, and we still have lots of remote collaboration. So we'll continue to benefit from the experience that we gain here. Thanks.
Thank you. That's great. I liked your comments about asynchronous and synchronous communication and being able to really use both of those modalities. I think that's one of another unforeseen benefit, definitely, to working remotely, is that we're able to experiment more now. So I appreciate those comments too. Let's see. So Mahantesh, are you ready to give us your comments? Super. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mahantesh Halapanawar. I'm a computer scientist at the Pacific Northwest National Lab, PNNL. I'm also a team lead and an acting group manager. And within ECP, I lead the Exascale Co-Design Center. As you can see in my background, it's a beautiful graph that represents protein-protein interaction networks. So I get very excited when we talk about graphs, but that's not the main goal here. Definitely coming and trying to work remotely, we have been adapting. So I'm more of a novice in this area, although I have been working 1 day a week for the past several years, but that was not really getting it started, and I cannot agree more with JJ when he said everybody working remotely 24/7, it's a different game altogether. And I believe coming out of this experience, we will have 2 kinds of organizations. So the one that adapted to online and making or enabling people work remotely, and that took care of these people and made them proud and made them belong. So these will be the ones that will succeed. And there are also organizations that have not adapted, either to the challenges or the manager mindset itself. So they may not survive this epidemic in the long run. And definitely, each person is going through a unique experience. Some have challenges with little kids and trying to work with little kids around. And some have even faced problems, issues on how would they stock up on medicine, especially if they had special conditions. So everybody is going through this experience in a very unique way. And it is teaching us to be non-judgmental. And definitely, we are becoming more tolerant of each other. So when kids come and interrupt, when pets come and interrupt, we are not suddenly jumping to the judgments and becoming frustrated, but we are more tolerant now to each other. And of course, with this unusual impact on everybody, so charity in all forms is essential. And definitely, like I said, our organization has adapted really well. And our director, lab director, ends every message calling us to give out to charity, because we might be some of the people that are actually doing and thriving well in this environment, which is not so for a lot of other organizations and a lot of other people. And like many people have said, regular and frequent communications is fundamental now, sometimes proactive and sometimes reactive. As a manager, I have received calls even late into the night, very late into the night, like 11:30, because even though these may not be real challenges, they are very real for the people that are experiencing them. There are many more challenges, especially in the context of software development and software testing and debugging. So paired programming in a lot of different forms was how we developed large scale projects, because we had interactions with subject matter experts and algorithms people who developed these algorithms, and algorithms people and programmers. We would just walk to a whiteboard or sit right next to each other and go through each line in the algorithm and adapt it to a program, and even performance testing. So all of these have become a significant challenge at this point, especially for those people that have not adapted to remote setting. People have been doing them really well for all these years, but some of us that did not adjust, it's a particularly well challenge. And again, international recruitments, like Mark said, is a challenge, especially with all the immigration issues that have come forth. And some people have been called out. For example, on one of our team, we had a person who played the role of a gel. He would basically bring all these teams together, and he was pulled out to do something else. And the whole team sort of fell apart. And now, instead of having to finish this in 2 days, it's still pending after 2 months. So it's becoming quite a bit of a challenge. And again, JJ mentioned about ergonomic challenges. This is actually significant. I personally ended up sitting in a not ergonomically designed chair for 4 weeks, and I was working close to 12 or 13 hours. I had to make a visit to the urgent care with a severe back pain. So these are real challenges. So please don't take them lightly. And it was really funny because the only person I could depend on had issues with his monitors, and he had a collar on his neck and I had a collar on my waist. So it was really funny. We couldn't really delegate anywhere else. So these can be real challenges. And again, how do we retain the human touch? I believe we'll hear more about this in one of the forthcoming issues. So it's really important. And again, I have personally saved close to 2 hours each day on commute. So it's extra time. And although it was unusual circumstance and work sort of took over everything, but moving forward, I think it's quite a bit of saving in time, and it's also added productivity because you're not gaining all this frustration from driving around. And we are also beginning to learn quite a bit about each other. And especially pets, and how people talk to pets as if they could somebody actually pleading to their pet saying just 10 more minutes, just hold on. And we also realized that we should take input from pets on the ideas that we were discussing. So we are learning quite a bit about each other as well. That also leads to greater tolerance. And again, our lab introduced LinkedIn Learning in a way which has exposed a significant amount of soft skills. And again, these are these are great opportunities for us to develop in a multifaceted manner and not just enhancing our core technical skills. We are also sort of looking at this opportunity to bring in work-life balance and better tools for collaboration. So we were just this past few weeks, and we have been doing this strategic planning where we would end up using thousands of yellow sticky notes on a giant poster, but now we are trying to manage this in an online setting. It's quite a bit of an experience, and it has been effective to a great extent. And just between these 20 people and thousands of sticky notes, I think it's pretty amazing how far we have come. And definitely the planet has benefited. The less pollution we are putting in, I think we should look forward to a cleaner and a better world coming out of this. Back to you, Elaine. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Those were really fantastic comments. I really appreciate especially your focus on charity. I think that that's a very nice way to put that. I think in many organizations now, we're starting to see diversity and inclusion organizations, including working remotely, as an important area of inclusion. So that's really great to see. And I think later, another comment that you made that would be nice to get back to is discussing with all of you how you're managing these large meetings and maybe even strategic meetings, especially those with sticky notes. So thanks for mentioning that. And don't let me forget that we should get back to that. I'd like to now invite Angela Herring to say a few words, my collaborator and friend. Welcome to the panel. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Elaine. So I'm Angela Herring. I work at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I manage 2 different teams. We work in the area of remap and code linking. And, you know, I have noticed some interesting things in this change to remote work. So the number one thing that I learned pretty quickly was when we first started this whole thing, people were trying to fill their calendars up with exactly the same meetings they had when they were in the office physically. And that meant that, you know, calendars were full. For the first couple of weeks we were at home, I was busier than I ever was at work. And that is saying something. There wasn't a place on my calendar to be found. And I was having a chat with my group leader one day, and, you know, he was asking, you know, what was I doing to adjust my teams? And I said, you know, and he's like, I'm really thinking about adding a weekly group meeting so we don't lose touch with each other. And he's like, I'll just have people talk, you know, each day. And I was like, wait, you know, that's great. But I think what we're missing here is not the technical content, but we're missing the chance to connect as people and humans. And so they, you know, so we turned it around and we turned it into a virtual water cooler. And I think that format has been really successful. So I've implemented that also on my own teams. And it's some time that people look forward to every week, right? We compare notes about lots of things. We talk about, you know, we live in a really small remote town, so where can you actually get supplies? What's going on in the schools? What childcare is going to be open? How do I get my pets taken care of? You know, we talk about all those things that people are stressing out about. And it's kind of reminding us to connect on this human level, because when we've gone to all of the electronic communication, you know, it's harder to remember that that's a real person that wrote a note to you. Another thing I've been trying to do more of is to call people individually. I want to talk to them, remember to connect with them, ask them about their kids. I have several folks on my team who have kids graduating this year, so that's a big deal right now. You know, there's been all this discussion about whether or not they'll be able to have an in-person ceremony and what have you. And so just taking that time to just reconnect as people has been really critical to keeping harmony in my teams. So as I mentioned, I have 2 teams, and, you know, they both have been, they get along very well. They're very gelled in person. And, you know, this transition to to remote work, I've seen some strain there that I've never seen before. So, you know, we're the kind of folks, we have a birthday party for our team. We go out for, you know, a social hour. We go hiking together. And having those things taken away from us was quite a blow. And I feel like we're finally now recovering. Benefits, you know, we have made extra efforts to build in some social connections. So we have been able to have some virtual water coolers. We're thinking about some socially distanced gathering, looking a little bit forward. I think a lot of folks have already mentioned this, but it's been easier to achieve work-life balance without having to transition from home to work and back. I'm fortunate to live very close to work, but I find that still even the 20 minutes or so that I would spend commuting and parking and whatever and getting to my office, you know, I can spend better at home. So what do I think we should look for opportunity-wise? I think one of the things that I hope that we as a world will take away from this is the realization that, you know, working from home can be productive, that there are models to do this successfully. And I hope that we can take this opportunity. You know, Los Alamos is at a remote location, and sometimes we have trouble hiring here. And so it would be nice to be able to fill and diversify some of those spots by taking some remote workers. Thank you.
Thanks, Angelo. You know, I know how close you've been with your team and how close you are, and so I can imagine that that really was a blow not to be able to go hiking with them and see them face to face. But I know that you guys in particular probably have a lot of interesting things that you're doing virtually, so I'd really love to hear more about that later. And now at this time, I'd like to invite Axel Hugo to tell us a little bit about his experience. So thank you for joining us, Axel.
Yeah, and thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I'm Axel. I'm a postdoc at the ECP WarpX team at Berkeley Lab. And what we do is we build basically an ECP application for the next generation of particle accelerators. So as an app, we are naturally integrating and communicating a lot because we are depending on a lot of the ECP software stack. We are developing on top of this algorithms on our own. And so digital communication, both locally as well as remotely, is core of what we have to do to be successful on that. And that's also the very first point that we saw, and again, that I would give it as advice is that basically it really turns around how do you organize your communication. And I won't repeat the points that many people have here, but for example, just to pick up the point that Mark already had, like using Google Docs for meeting notes. So one point, for example, that we discovered is when you have online meetings, and sometimes there's this point, does anyone have something to add, right? Or you start with that and then nothing is happening because no one wants to interrupt each other. Am I cutting out? Oh, sorry, I see it on the chat. I get a little bit closer, just in case that's happening for others as well. So what we found, for example, is just to keep a permanent Google Docs open and use this also for agenda setting, right? So if you have a weekly meeting and you, in the middle of the week, have a point that you want to discuss in the next meeting, just add it to the agenda. And at the beginning of the meeting, organize this and go through that. That works really, really well for us. And another point that I, as a postdoc, right, that's more not in the leadership part, really appreciate is really the transparency of decision processes in the lab. So on all levels, actually, when this crisis started. So, for example, even if the management of the lab tells you that we have to do decisions as they occur, right, as they are coming up from day to day in the first weeks, that's also a form of transparent communication that really helped people and helped them to cope with their anxieties, that they don't just get a decision, now that's like this, right? They say, we're winging it and you will get an update in half a day. That's how it is right now. And communicating that transparently and communicating why a decision was made is really helpful. And we're doing this on all levels. And I can say at least also in our group, that's how it was handled already locally, and it's continued to be that. That's really helping. I will talk a little bit later on the unforeseen benefits that come out with documentation and things like this. So what I also would like to add is that equality really of people that work locally and remotely is really improving. So our team is quite large. So we have a core team in ECP that works in Berkeley Lab, but we have very close collaborators as well in Slack and in Livermore. We have 3 to 4 collaborators that actively contribute to our open source code base from France. And they are basically now all on the same level, because the hallway meetings that we had before, they have to be somehow now really reorganized. And we have a couple of tricks that helped us there, for example. So for example, to have a hallway meeting, besides spinning up Zoom meetings quickly that are one-to-one, also we are actually reusing Zoom channels intentionally. So it could be that you're popping into someone that has a 5-minute breakout session and you can just contribute to the thing. And we're having a really fine-grained organization in our Slack channel, so that if someone has a one-to-one hallway discussion about a specific topic, you can contribute if you are interested in the topic and go into that and jump into the meetings. So these are like small tricks to move as much as communication into this semi-public forum that you actually have this hallway feeling in there. Challenges in there, well, the thing is really how you fine-grain and organize these methods. So of course there can still be Zoom meetings that could have been an email. But these tricks that I just mentioned help a lot there. And so in our case, we just adjusted this over the first weeks. We said, like, do we need an additional meeting? We tried it out, then we realized, well, if we use these other techniques, we can stick to 2, 3 very fixed meetings that everyone can participate, usually in the mornings because they're international then, with participants from Europe as well that help there. And that helps a lot there. And everything else can be then more ad hoc with the methods. With terms of what Angela mentioned with very full calendars, that's exactly the point, right? If you're popping into an office of someone and they are already working with someone on a topic, or you see they had already 3 back-to-back meetings, then you see that people are right now busy, right? And how can you indicate this? In the past, it was mainly like the big flood of emails that people have, and somehow you didn't get an email for 3 weeks, and then we usually start with sorry for not responding earlier. The same thing is true with live communication, right? And the being able to indicate this in one way or another with Slack statuses or with email responses and so on, and making this part of our real workflows really gives also people that are on PTO or that are actually, that have parenting jobs, for example, so that really helps them. And this is really some things that I think improves generally also as an outlook. To mix in an unforeseen benefit, so our team is working strongly in open source development workflows. And we realized that embracing really this open development by, for example, when we do have asynchronous meeting, documenting the outcomes of those in open issues really helps to equalize and to include more people that are not in the same office, not in the same building, not even on the same continent. So embracing these workflows helps a lot. And yeah, I think that is what I wanted to say. So the as a starter, so we can embrace this asynchronous working hours, independent if we are just not in the same office or have other duties. And with that, back to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And so I'd like to open up the panel to questions. I'd like to start with one that follows on what you were saying, Axel, about workflows. And I'd like to open it to just the entire panel. Have you noticed any differences, maybe that haven't been mentioned, that you've had to employ to be as productive as before, or as JJ suggested, ways that maybe you are even more productive now? So does, would anyone like to go ahead and take a stab at that from the panel?
Well, if you want, I can.
Sure, go ahead.
I can jump ahead. I mean, I would, productivity, a lot of productivity in our team is people that develop specific projects, and you need to help each other all the time, right? So it's, you're way more productive if you're not sticking to yourself for 2 weeks and then come up with your solution. But actually, if you're stuck with some part, help with someone. And what we realized is usually you would come to someone's office and people would notice, and you would actually reach out to a third person, even if it's necessary. And that's also what takes some time, right, in the daily work. But actually, that's how you solve problems in a creative way. And what I realized is that's actually hindering performance in some way now if you go to fully private communication, right? Writing a private Slack message to someone. My notifications are all the time red, for example. It doesn't help. I don't get through them fully in a day. But if we make this as open as I suggested, like having these channels and pinging the people on them, they will still get the notification, they will see them, but maybe someone else can jump into there. It's like public mailing lists, right? It's the same thing. You don't write to the developer directly if someone doesn't compile. You write on the public mailing list, and maybe someone had the same problem already. And then it goes through, like, to having these levels of support helps a lot there. And that again actually improves then productivity, because then people don't go to the direct person as they would do in the office. So that was one experience that I saw that's increasing productivity as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Jay, have you employed anything differently or similar processes?
I think our secret is that we just stay in our pajamas and mainline coffee all day long, right? You know, a coder is an organism that converts caffeine to code. So that's probably our secret. I think, joking aside, I think one of the things that has been critical for us is the increase in productivity has been enabled by being able to focus more. And so it's really important to be able to talk to people as Axel describes, and we engage in our Slack channel in much the same way, and in Microsoft Teams. But you know, like from my perspective personally, and I think Axel mentioned this when he was giving his talk earlier, you know, if someone comes in my office and I'm sitting at my desk and I'm typing away at the computer, there's an assumption that no one else is in there. I must be available. And I'm not really super busy because there's no one else there talking to me. But in fact, you know, I may be focusing on something, and I may be at a really critical point where if my focus is disrupted, I don't get to address it. And so I think a lot of our productivity enhancements have come from being able to focus more deeply, and then as a team thinking about the etiquette that we employ around contacting each other. So we've had a lot of discussions when you're using Slack. How much should you be, as Axel was saying, how much should you be like putting things with an @channel to like notify it, to blast it to everyone, versus just kind of leaving it and letting people get back to it in due time. Some of us have adopted kind of official quiet time where we actually, you know, put our notifications on hold, just so that we can, you know, if you think about what Angela was saying, you know, people will fill your calendar up with the same type of meeting that worked really well when everyone was on site, but maybe it doesn't now that you're off site. And so we've adopted some quiet time, and some of us are working through that. But really, it ultimately comes back down to that deep focus.
How about anybody else on the panel? Any comments about that? I know that for me personally, with deep focus, I've actually had to really schedule time on my own calendar for that. So does anyone have any other strategies or that your team is using? Yeah, go ahead, Manfred.
So one strategy that worked really well for me in the earlier was that I used to use this one day work from home as my hiding place. I would basically hide and not have any meetings on that day. So that worked really well, and that way, you know, I could basically go around and interact with a lot of people. So now that is gone. And in the beginning, when we switched, there were a lot of meetings, and some of it were also when we were quickly adapting to how the COVID situation evolved. So we were doing a lot of check-ins, and that has dramatically decreased at this point. So now, but it is also becoming very difficult because your day sort of blends into the rest of the day. And even though you start at 8 in the morning, you don't necessarily go back and leave this place. So having that quiet time is becoming a lot more challenging, especially for people that are still new into the adjusting game. And maybe, you know, that's why we should listen to all the veterans that have been giving us all these secrets, but we are not willing to listen in a way. I think we should go back and listen to them.
That's a great point. I wanted to also note that we have a question that's, well, actually, we had a question in the chat, which we'll get to, and then Axel, you posted a link. Would you like to say something about the link that you posted before I get to the other question?
Sure, yeah. So several people asked if they were not able to use Google Docs in their work for various reasons. I know that it's the same problem, for example, for our European colleagues that can't use this due to some privacy reasons. So you can set up open source software that does the same thing. Like Nextcloud is a open source collaborative groupware that also has support for docs in quite a decent way. And that's one way to do it. And that's one example that I posted there. Others mentioned Etherpad, which is essentially like the Google Doc Word variant.
Great, thank you. That's a good suggestion. We did have a question in the chat that came from Alfred, and he asked about how would each of you deal with official use only documentation or work when you are using tools that live outside of your firewall. Does anyone have any answers for that?
I'll speak to that, Elaine, without saying too much about, you know, our security setup. We don't deal with that type of information outside of our firewall.
Thank you. Yeah. And so I have a couple other questions I'd like to ask you all. In particular, I wanted to get to tools and to ask questions about whiteboarding in particular. A lot of folks have asked about what tools would you use in lieu of a whiteboard? How do you try to simulate it? Do you use any whiteboarding tools? So please, I'd like to hear from the panelists on what your strategies are for meetings that require, or not require whiteboards, but where a whiteboard would certainly be helpful. That's great.
Yeah.
I get it. So what I'm doing, I'm laughing because I'm looking at Jay's video, if you haven't seen his screen yet, and he has a huge whiteboard and he's able to show us. I'm going to spotlight you, Jay, so that people can see what you're doing. And there we go. So you use that in your meetings, your whiteboard?
I actually do. So I use this whiteboard, which I bought on Amazon.com years ago. It rolls around, it flips. I use it during technical meetings. Like when I do some design work, I do a lot of software architecture and design work. And when I come up with a particular plan, what I'll do is I'll actually draw it out on this. And then I've got a little pointer. I'll stand up and kind of present to the whiteboard. It's very handy.
That's brilliant.
That's
I
very
like
cool.
that a lot. Come on, I know there are some other strategies. What else have you guys done? Go ahead. Yeah, Mahantesh, please.
I mean, without being very aware that I'm not recommending any tools with that warning. So one of the tools that we used recently that worked really well is called as Mural. So Mural basically lets you build a giant chart and you can use other templates. And then you can go post in these sticky notes, you can do voting, and then you can move them around. So it felt fairly comfortable to use. But again, the problem is that you'll have to zoom into different portions. And if you don't have a large monitor set up at your workplace, trying to do it on a 13-inch laptop can be really difficult. And again, I think Zoom also provides you a whiteboard to try and do other things, but you need some tools. Nothing can beat the rolling whiteboard that JJ showed.
Yeah, that's a good approach.
Yeah, Jay, I really like that you just bring in a literal whiteboard. That seems like an actual low-tech but very good solution. I've used the Zoom whiteboard and it's been a little frustrating. At times I've broken out, so I have OmniGraffle or Inkscape is another, like a graphics program, and then I just share my screen, but it's very awkward. So
yeah. The one solution that I Oh, are we stuck? No.
Yeah.
Go ahead, we can hear you.
Okay. One solution that I recently found is on the other end. I'm literally grabbing the frame buffer of a tablet that I bought a couple of years back, and I'm just writing on an e-ink tablet directly and can put it in as a extra camera device. So on Linux, this is basically a loopback video device, and I'm just replacing my real camera with that one as it runs. But yeah, that has some hardware investment involved.
And we've used like Inkscape. We also have started, we would have a lot of discussions in person on whiteboards. It's one of the things we miss the most. And we've had to train ourselves to maybe make diagrams and discussion pages on Confluence ahead of time. And so that our discussions, at least we have something to point at in our discussions. We mostly use WebEx, and we find that whiteboard to have too much lag really for us to be able to use it in real time.
Yeah, we have a couple, let's see, suggestions from the chat also. Let's see, we've got some others that have had some issues with the Zoom whiteboard. Mark has successfully used Google Draw, so that's another suggestion in the chat. And again, there are other teams that do use Confluence also, like you do, Angela. And let's see, the chat is moving pretty quickly. There was a question from Ashley. And what Ashley was wondering is that she's got a new software developer. And so this is changing the subject a little bit off of whiteboard, but we can always go back. Well, before I move off, does anybody have any comments about whiteboard before I change the subject from the panelists? Yeah? Okay. So Ashley's question is, she's got a new software developer that is going to be starting, and he's going to join a team. They've worked on site, but, and so they have a lot of good relationship that they've built up. And is there any, do you have any tips on how to make a new person that's joining a team feel welcome now that the team is virtual, but they don't really know anyone else that's on the team? So I think the situation is you've got a team that's virtual. Part of the team, most of the team knows each other very, very well. And then you've got some new people that you're trying to onboard to this team that they all know each other well. Any suggestions? Anyone going through that?
I have one. So one thing I think that makes my team tick is having folks connected on a personal level.
Can you say a little more about that?
I'm sorry, it's looking like I dropped off or something. And so what I would suggest is giving the new developer time to work individually with some of the other developers. So like some pair programming. So one surprising thing that we found that works really well is pair programming remotely, because we can share screens and show each other a lot. And so I think one of the overwhelming things as a new software developer is getting your mind around the code base and also meeting people. And so the idea would be, you know, give them a chance to maybe rotate through a few people pair programming so they get oriented and get to know folks at the same time.
That's actually a really great advice. And I wonder if we can move the subject to pair programming remotely. Anyone else have any other thoughts? So how do you actually, what are some best practices that you guys are coming up with now that you're doing some pair programming remotely?
Yes, we do this all the time, actually. So we don't only share the screen, but also the keyboard access. So we are literally typing from our own keyboards into the same source file several times a day. And that works really well to get someone started with how do I structure this, or how do I kickstart a new document. So that's what we established, I think, over the last month successfully. We tried this just actually this morning, something new where we really started a complete new project together. They really start with put the main. And also there with a not too high amount of people, you can already kickstart this as well in the same format. So you put someone on screen, also share access to the screen where it's needed. And as soon as you have the first structure there, you branch out as you usually do in development. So that works for us.
I'm curious, do you also share video while you're doing that of yourselves?
Yes, yeah, continuously.
So what does your desktop look like then when you're utilizing the tools together?
You mean the virtual desktop?
Yeah, or what do you see? So you're getting cues and you're getting cues from the person that you're doing the pair programming with, and then you're also in the code.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we both get the visual feedback of someone doing something, and you that's like the short sentences that you can do when you see a person really, right? And like, is this, and like, you have to put the prefix there, and like, oh yeah, sure, that's it.
Right.
So both is important there. Yeah, that's only sharing the code usually cuts this part of the interaction, and it's more productive to keep the video on. Yes.
Okay. Anyone else with any other strategies?
I think that's certainly something that we do, trying to make sure that we have as interactive as possible code reviews, or sorry, pair programming. But we also do code reviews and can review those together. So we can bring up a meeting to look through the PR and just kind of walk through it. So I mean, that's for kind of a slightly different use case, right? So the code is kind of at some state of done in that case, but we still get to go through it together. And then, you can actually use, there are a lot of web-based IDEs these days, and a few of them will actually show multiple editors. So it's pretty neat that you can use tools like that. One of the things that I'm hoping we start doing more of, we've tested it out in the past, but that's using these web-based IDEs like Eclipse, Che, and Eclipse Thea, for our regular, just for our regular development workflows. So that's something that's probably the next step for us.
So this is one place where we use I mentioned using the Slack channel while we're doing video. And so if I just have a tiny little code snippet, I can paste it into the Slack channel, and it's an easy way to just share tiny little bits of code. If we're doing more extensive things, sharing the screen and doing that would probably work better.
Ashley, do we have any questions from the chat?
So there was one much earlier, and I think it's a question we received. Actually, we received in kind of all three of these webinars that we've done, and it's, is there anything you can do here with OUO material, with OUO issues? And so that is a challenge, obviously. So maybe the panelists have found some workarounds for that.
We briefly addressed that earlier. Jay just answered, normally we don't use these tools for OUO, but Ashley's right. Maybe we can think a little bit about, what are the ways that we can collaborate, or how do we collaborate with other National Lab employees? Let's maybe expand that question out a little bit more. I know we've got the ECP tool suite that we use, but if you are collaborating, let's say, with others outside of maybe the ECP project, does anyone have any thoughts, any recommendations on ways that you might be able to collaborate with others? Maybe something that's not necessarily OUO, but just ways to collaborate, practicing good, I guess, security practices. Yeah, please, Mahantesh, please.
So I think we recently switched to Teams, and that is security is becoming quite a bit. And all of a sudden we had some participants that could not use Zoom. So we are beginning to switch to Zoom, and some of us have gotten a lot of training on that. So Zoom sort of brings in all these different aspects as well. Channels, Mural I mentioned, even Wiki and chat that sort of process. It's still a new tool. It's a little complex for everybody to get up to speed. So that really helped us. And we also just recently did a virtual workshop where we did not have a good estimate, and we did not put out the Zoom password on the web. So instead, we opened up a Google form where people could register, and then we were communicating with only those people with the password. So both were a little bit of a slightly different experiences for us.
That's an interesting approach. Thank you.
So Elaine, along those lines, there is a question from someone who says they love using Slack and Teams. This is from Gavin. So Gavin says he loves using Slack and Teams, but some of his colleagues still insist on using email, especially the older folks. And how do we convince them to ditch email and use some of these modern tools that we now have available? Maybe modern is not the right word, but these tools that we have available.
That's great. Who would like to tackle that? How do we start to get people to adopt new tools in our organizations?
It was really funny because we were having another conversation where somebody was commenting that they had 7 different communication channels open, Zoom, BlueJeans, anything else you could think of, and eventually the computer crashed and they had to hard boot it back. So it is a challenge, and I go back. Maybe I am one of these older folks that are a little slow to adapt. So email is a killer app. And this morning we had a manager meeting, and the complaint was that Teams does not inform or send an email. So that was the complaint. I think this will not go away anytime soon. So this will persist to be a little bit of a challenge.
I agree. This will continue to be a challenge. At some point, it gets to be overkill, and yeah, I very much feel that you have to meet people where they are. If someone's going to use email, you go use email with them. But it can be a bit of an overkill. Like right now, I'm currently running on 3 monitors. I have a tablet in the room that I can bring up other communication tools on. I have my cell phone, which is constantly buzzing with text messages and other things. And to second what was just said, I've had my machine crash a few times just because I've had so many communication channels open on it. But my answer to Gavin would be, you've got to meet people where they are, and the best way to convert them to a new tool is to just get them to sit down in a meeting with you. Slack has video chat capabilities, which are quite good, and you can still use all the chat features and everything with it. So, just sit down with them and give that a try. That's worked for me in the past. What I found, and what I found is it doesn't matter. Their age doesn't matter. It's not old people or young people. I have a colleague who is mid-50s, absolutely did not like Teams when he started using it, and now he knows like every trick, every switch, every little special thing that you can do with it. So it's not just our older colleagues. It's everyone can learn how to use these tools.
And I think it doesn't work to force a tool on people. I think it kind of has to come out organically to a certain extent. I tried shifting my teams over to our Slack clone, Mattermost, and that went over like a lead balloon. People had a mailing list for quite a long time, and that list probably gets 100 emails a day, and it is like a chat. It's so busy. And I was hoping to shift them over, but if the team has something that's working, why make them shift, right? I mean, sure, it can be hard to sort through those emails, but people are getting responses in 2 or 3 minutes. I don't want to break a good thing.
Yeah. What I would like to add is, oh, sorry, the video. I hope I'm not cutting. What I would like to add is, and it's also mentioned on the chat right now, is that email does indeed leave a paper trail or a digital paper trail that Slack does not. For example, in chat. Chat is really things that can be gone if you didn't watch them for a week, then it's not too important that they are already out of the history. So I think both of, or multiple of these tools have their reason for that to stay around. So it's definitely a balance, and use the right tool for the right job.
That's a really interesting point. I think what I'm what I'm thinking about here is that your mention of Slack, and I think we think of Slack as an asynchronous tool, but if it's in a chat, there are levels of asynchronicity, right? And so it's a spectrum. So when you send an email, I think your expectations are different from when you send a Slack comment, and I think that's really interesting to think about that. I think that you guys are right. You can't force anyone to adopt something. It's certainly not a matter of age. And I really love the point about awareness. Like Jay said, just sit down with someone and help them, walk them through it, educate them on how you would like to use that medium, and then also just what the best practice is that you can create together. So those are really great comments. Thank you. I know that we have another question. This one is really an interesting one as well. Let me see if I can find it, because the chat is moving so quickly that I'm having trouble monitoring it. But it is a question about switching. If you are on more than one team, which most of you probably are, and let's say each team has a different preferences for how they like to communicate. How are you managing the switch from moving from one team to another and managing those communication technologies? Jay, do you want us to take that one?
Sure. I was typing in the chat, so there's the communication. There's the communication overload. So the question was, how do we manage the switch?
How do you manage the switch if the teams have different preferences for communication and for having that open channel?
Yeah. So Chris had a comment in there that is essentially, I was responding back to that, and it's essentially the way I look at it. One thing I want to point out is that email is still mail, right? I mean, it's mail. It's very asynchronous, and so there are some folks that they live there, and I meet them there. But my general preference is that that's a mailbox, and I answer it when I have the chance. I tend to go find people where they are. If they have what I need, I'll go there. The way that I would liken this to being back in the office, we wouldn't wait to walk down the hall to knock on a door, right? We wouldn't say, oh, I'm going to wait an hour to walk 5 doors down and give it a knock. We would just go down and knock and get the answer we need, or we would go to the admin's office, or we would go to the cafeteria to get our food when we needed it. And so if someone prefers to use Microsoft Teams to get an answer, I've been using Linux for 25 years now, and sure, I'll install the Teams client on Linux and go use like a sandbox version of Windows to get in touch with them. I don't mind. And I think that's how we have to look at just be willing to switch. But as Chris was saying in the chat, be willing to switch and meet them there. And then Chris's earlier comment, sometimes you just have to tell people, I gotta go for a while. If you really need me, catch me with this mechanism, with this tool. I normally say Slack, and if someone can't find me there, then I'll catch them when I'm done with my work.
Anyone else have a different approach? Mark, how about you? We haven't heard from you in a while. How do you guys manage most of this at the university?
So in our teams, I have Slack open most of the time and my email. So I just have those 2 tabs open most of the time and try to, monitor both of those. As Slack is going to be a little bit faster to get notifications and stuff. I'm a little bit lucky in that I really am just sitting on one team, and so I don't have to manage, you know, quite so many different things. And then, yeah, otherwise, you know, we just use a lot of different video conferencing software, whoever is setting it up. But
one thing that I found in my teams is that because I've been working remotely for a longer time, for about 14 years, I had to also think about the ways that work has changed for me, even though I have a lot of experience at it. So I have been checking in with people and asking them, hey, you know, before when we used to communicate, you were co-located with, you know, a larger team. And so we really only used email or other mechanisms that I thought, you know, were pretty standard. Now that we're all virtual, what are you using now and what are your preferences? And I'm finding that for a lot of people that's changing. So it's, I guess the point is, just because we used to do it before one way doesn't mean that everybody's doing it that way now. And so that's one way that I've had to really adapt what I do for teams. So I don't want to ignore any questions that might be in the chat. Ashley, is there something in the chat that you want me to follow up on? If not, I've got another question here.
Yeah, I think JJ had an interesting discussion there with someone that was discussing about mentions if you get specifically pinged. And this might come back to the expectation, right, of the platform. So for example, if we are on platforms and we know we are not able to monitor them efficiently because it's just not where we can spend time on, then probably setting the appropriate status will help these people to see that a mention will not be answered. In my case, for example, I maintain a lot of open source repositories that I'm watching every activity. And that it means for me the last months, I'm not able actually to catch up with mentions because they just got interleaved in my notifications. So one of the things is also to really unsubscribe from getting pinged for communications that one is not mentioned on, and just focus on the ones that are actually direct communication. This could be a way to go.
That's a good suggestion.
I'll add that I do the same thing, Axel. There are a lot of open source packages where I've unsubscribed from everything except for mentions, so that I can zoom in on specifically what I need to respond to. So that's kind of a pro tip that I like to share, is just, you know, subscribe to @mentions only, so you're where you need to be if you can't be there all the time.
All right. I've got a question here about the balance between macro and micromanagement of your remote teams. So for example, how are you all managing virtual office hours or recurring one-on-ones and larger meetings? Any of these on demand? So if you wouldn't mind, if maybe each of you could address that, I think it would be interesting. Share your pro tips for us, please. And how about we start? We'll start maybe with with Angela. How about that?
Okay. So my teams are run with kind of a modified Scrum. And so we already have standing meetings to plan our work and to do demos. We have Scrums several days a week. And so those are all places that people can touch. And then I think the kind of the secret ingredient to our happiness is that we also have something we call tea time. And at tea time, we have open discussions. It can be, so the idea, if you're in person, is to come in, have a snack together, talk, catch up. And what we find in those discussions is that inevitably those become technical discussions after about, 10 minutes, 15 minutes of catching up on kids and family and whatever. And so having those touch points of like, oh, we need to have a discussion on this, we need to have a discussion on that. We have a standing time to have those. And so I think that's kept us going really well. And while they don't translate perfectly into the virtual world, it's harder to get the same kind of connection you get in person. We still do have those times when we can come together, We can look at a pull request somebody's worried about. We can work through some technical issue that somebody needs to talk about. And so that's been super helpful for us. And then additionally, we have WebEx for kind of impromptu meetings. So people will be like, join me in my personal room. You can go in there and chat with them, share screens, and what have you. So I feel like that hasn't been a terrible transition for my team.
Good, thank you. How about Mark? What are you guys doing?
Yes, we have, generally we've sort of kept the same meetings that we had previously to going remote. So we have like a larger weekly meeting for the linear algebra team, and then a smaller meeting for our slate team. And then we do some one-on-one meetings kind of as needed. Some of those are weekly things, and some are just when people say, hey, I need to talk about something, and we'll just do that then. But do you find that it's yeah, we definitely need more meetings than if we were just in more like scheduled meetings than if we were in the office, because we're missing that kind of hallway interactions. And so I have to be a little bit more deliberate about checking in with people, or you could, not see somebody for a whole week and then, not know what they're working on. So we also do, as ICL, we also do a larger, like a lunch talk meeting every Friday. So that's the whole group, like 50 plus people, which is a nice way of just kind of getting in touch with everybody and disseminating information, and then hearing some things from about what people's work is.
How about Axel? Anything?
Yeah, I think with these meetings and also how many people are in there, we have basically a hierarchy of meetings, and also depending on your work level, how important they are for you to attend them or to contribute. Also, it's different if you listen to updates that are division wide versus if you contribute to a developer meeting. So we have usually in the area of 10 people there, then 20 on the all hands of our team, and then up to 50 in the division meeting. And yeah, not too many of them, right? They have to have a focus and also an agenda, and you have to know if you're more the receiving end or if you're contributing there. But it helps, yeah, grouping them down.
So one thing I want to follow up with that and ask about the execution of all of these meetings. So do you all have, are you managing them yourselves, and are you scheduling them yourselves? Do you have others helping you? Maybe you're tag teaming with others to do kind of like a collaborative, management of the teams. How about you, Mahatesh? What are you guys doing in PPNL?
Yeah, definitely. So we went from a whole range of 2 times a day all the way to weekly to monthly basis in the last few months. And I get help from the secretaries and from my team members. So they help with various aspects. And I think one key lesson is to adapt quickly to the changing conditions. I don't think there is one magic formula that would work under all circumstances. And because I also have multiple roles, so I have to talk to teams that do project work, and I have to talk to teams that are line management responsibilities. And because I'm also doing this dual role with team leader and the group leader, I sort of ended up having 4 levels of management meetings, and then having to do my project meetings as well. It was really out of control. There was nothing else I was doing per se. So then we quickly switched, right? Because it was too much for people to, they don't want really spend any time in these meetings, but they want to know everything. So how do we bring that balance is hard. So what we have sort of found the sweet spot is to have technical meetings so that they can actually go back with something substantial that they have learned, while we also spend a few minutes on the updates. Some things that they need to do in the following days, like the COVID-related training, COVID-related activities, and especially in the state of Washington, there is also unemployment fraud that is happening. So we are forcing everybody to take a proactive step by registering and blocking at least our own social security numbers. So all of these are really important that they cannot miss, but we don't want to overwhelm them with so many messages that they miss important topics as well. So I think one idea is to just adapt to the changing situations.
That's an interesting point. So it sounds a lot like you're leveraging people around you who can help,
Yeah.
so that it's a team effort. It's you know, to really get something done requires
Yes.
all hands on deck,
Right.
especially now. I think that's really interesting. Are you experiencing the same thing, JJ?
I'm in very good hands. So I have Donna Wilkerson and the computer science and mathematics division's admin team. The whole group really take care of us, and a lot of them are on this call. So because they try to keep up on what we're doing and how we're doing it, and how they can make us effective. And so working with our group, Donna really does an excellent job helping getting all of the meetings scheduled. And she doesn't do it just for me. She does it for the whole group, and then she does it in other places where she can help out. And I think that this is one of the things that we have to do is in a situation like this, where scheduling meetings is kind of more than just putting it on a calendar and somebody walking there. We have to rely on help. One of the things that I'll say that, you know, like I saw a comment in the chat about a meeting coordinator from Susan Boggs. You know, we've been interviewing a lot of people. We've hired a lot of people remotely right now. And one of the things that Donna's done that's really fantastic is actually coordinate the interview and be available to the candidate throughout the day. So if we were at the laboratory, Donna would be escorting the candidate around, and she can do the same thing virtually by being there in the chat. And so we can really think about doing these tasks in new ways that leverage the technology and make us more effective.
So interesting ideas about onboarding. That's going to be the topic of our next panel in a couple weeks. So that's a great topic to follow up on. Let's see. So I know that the chat has been pretty active. Does anyone want to summarize it for me? Ashley, were there any questions? I want to make sure we get to them because we are approaching 4:30.
So most of the dialogue has just been people giving suggestions to some of the questions that have been asked. So there's some really good information in the chat. It is archived, so you know, we'll try to go through here and pull out some of these good tips for you. But selfishly, I put a question in there, and so if we still have time, I was wondering if you all were doing anything different now that you're working remotely to gather requirements for new software projects. If you're doing something different, what is it? And if you're not doing anything different, is it still, are you finding you're able to get those requirements as well as you were pre-COVID? Hopefully, I hope that question made sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. Axel, go ahead.
Actually still doing the same thing that I did before. So you mean like gathering dependencies like for new projects that you want to include, or in your project planning of your own project?
So I was thinking more along the lines of, you know, when someone comes to you and says, hey, can you do this thing for me, you know, and you have to gather the requirements and understand what they really need, and then, like you said, walk through the dependencies. So basically starting a new project from scratch with a customer. What have you been doing? You know, normally we would get in a little room and whiteboard and talk, and so I'm just wondering what you're doing now.
I could comment on the dependency selection, and someone else could probably comment on the planning of the project aspect of this question. So what I did already before and what I'm still doing is, if I'm gathering dependencies for a new project, and they have not been used in my toolchain before, I will usually try them out, then usually improve something and see if my improvements get mainlined. If they get ignored for a month, that's unlikely to become a dependency of mine because it's not active enough to be future safe.
So Ashley, I'd be happy to comment about the requirements question. So in our case, you know, our group has always been able to function in a distributed way. So we've been doing, you know, kind of virtual requirements gathering exercises for over a decade now. And so we're not necessarily doing, it's not like we have, you know, kind of new forms or new procedures. You know, for those times where we did get in the room, you know, something that I always liked to do was to bring food, because people could you know, kind of have a snack and just talk through things and work through issues. Yeah, I can't share my chocolate anymore, so I have to, we have to suffer through that. But you can still do the same type of thing, like Angela was talking about, you know, the kind of virtual water cooler things. You can still kind of have, you know, maybe like a pre-meeting warm-up where people just kind of sit around and chat a little bit to kind of get warmed up and motivated to talk further. One of the things that one of our staff members, John Hetrick, is doing is having working sessions where so these, you know, there's a difference between kind of a meeting and a working session. And so what John does that's really great is that John will have these working sessions that are 2 or 3 hour blocks where everyone's on the same video call, and they're just doing a lot of the background work that you know, you'd get around a table and do while you're doing requirement solicitation or design work for a project. And so we're doing that on our no charge IO project and some other things that John's doing.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Anyone else want to add to this and answer Ashley's question? Okay, I really want to take a few moments, if we could, to talk a little bit about Scrum meetings. I know Angela's got a lot of experience with them. She mentioned them in her remarks. And I'm wondering, Angela, are there any things that you've had to do as you're moving to a completely virtual team that you would suggest for other teams who have been co-located and who have been doing Scrum meetings?
So I think the biggest thing I've added to my Scrum meetings, so the meetings themselves are pretty straightforward and can be done virtually. But a lot of times people were using the Scrum as a place to find their colleagues. And so, you know, you knew that you were always going to see this person at 9:45 on Tuesday, and you were able to then be like, okay, I need to talk to you after the meeting. And so what I've started doing is just leaving the conference open a little longer so that people can still meet virtually after those times, right? Just to kind of encourage the kind of what we would be doing in person. So I think that's kind of the biggest change on Scrum meetings.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. I find that a lot of times in meetings that we have, we could really benefit from those few extra moments for people to get together and kind of talk about what's going to happen next. And it's really great when it's fresh in their minds. I wonder if anybody else on the panel has some thoughts about Scrum meetings, especially for teams who've been co-located and now, you know, they may have a different situation.
In the case of the research software engineering group, we've been doing daily stand-up meetings of some sort for over a decade, and you know, we used to actually stand up during them so they wouldn't drag on too long. And you know, I think that's always important. One of the things that we do, we don't actually, because we have 20, I guess in a couple of days it'll be 26 staff members in the group or something. We used to have kind of a group stand-up or status meeting. And so now we've actually completely virtualized that and made it asynchronous, because we still want to provide each other the updates of what we're doing, but we actually want to have project-specific meetings because we're not all working on the same project. So we have now kind of, we essentially have a Slack channel that is a long thread of the general updates of where people say that, hey, this is what I'm doing. And then we have project-specific status meetings where it makes sense. So every morning at 9:30, we have our status meeting for the Neutron Computing Project at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And that's something, you know, those of us who are on it, we're there, we do it, but other projects have them at different times. So we can run them asynchronously, and then we can go back to the main Slack thread to see what colleagues are doing if we need to catch up with them.
Great, thank you. So do we have any other final questions from the chat channel, Ashley?
I am not seeing, I think things are still just kind of tips and things that are just in response to some of the questions that have been asked. So no, I think we've covered everything in the chat.
Okay, great, thank you. There is a question that we can answer it, I guess, pretty quickly if you guys have some thoughts. What are you doing to learn while you're remotely working? So are you doing anything differently? How are you continuing to learn?
That's a great question. And so my team has come up with some innovative ways that I'm really impressed with and happy about. So in our group meetings, we've started giving 5-minute talks about projects that are going on with kind of a focus on teaching people new things. And then the other thing that we're doing, so Jean Beaulieu started a tip of the day Slack channel, which turns out to be a lot more than just one tip of the day. So we've got a lot of tips going in there. And this is different than our random channel. Our random channel is where we really teach each other, I guess, about life, culture, and art and those things. And then for maybe some of the bigger topics, you know, today during our group meeting, we were talking about we have a group library that we maintain in our suite at the laboratory. And we're talking about ways that maybe we can revitalize that through the pandemic. I think for bigger topics, people are still doing training. There's a lot of effort for people that people are going through to figure out how to do training virtually, and we're succeeding at that. But I would highly recommend the tip of the day channel on your instant messaging service of choice, and to do those 5-10 minute talks at your team get-togethers.
That's nice, great, thank you. Okay, Mahantesh, what is your last pro tip?
So I briefly had mentioned this earlier. So PNNL has subscribed to the LinkedIn Learning. That's one channel. I think there are so many different courses that are available there. And again, time is it's becoming a short supply. We only have so much time. And we also did quite a bit of training through the PNNL University that we have. So that mostly on all the soft skills that now become critical under these situations.
Okay.
And we are continuing to actually deliver books that can be shipped to homes directly. So people are still buying books, the more formal way of learning.
Nice. All right, Angela, do you have any final pro tips?
So we use our tea time a lot of times to talk to folks to teach, right? So we can use those to review pull requests, and so we can teach each other about profiling has been a hot topic lately, or what have you. I think today's topic is actually a technical topic that somebody has on interface reconstruction. So we try to leave those times open so that we can connect with each other and we can learn about what everyone's been up to.
Great, thank you. And how about Mark, your pro tip, please?
So the best way that we learn is by teaching, and so I've asked some people to give a tutorial on some topic that maybe they're not an expert on, and so they actually have to learn the topic pretty well in order to give that tutorial. And then what I do just personally, a lot of times when I'm learning something, I'll write up like a summary sheet, which could be a couple pages long or something, of like, I'm learning a new language, these are the commands in that language, and just doing that, writing that, and writing some examples is how I sort of learn through new material.
Great, thank you. And Axel, do you have any pro tips, final pro tips?
I'm sad that Mark just got it, but we're giving each other demos actually in a very similar way, like tutorial styles. So everyone can see the screen of the presenter, and we do together a new feature, like how do I use the new in situ visualization? How do I use the new build system? And we complement this also with more traditional things, like actually do like remote lectures, attending once a week, for example, in some university for a new topic to learn personally. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, well, I would like to go ahead and conclude our session and thank our panelists. On behalf of Ashley and myself, we would really like to thank each of you very much for participating. This was really a great panel. I learned a lot. I'm sure that we all did. And I think that we may have to get back with you at some point and see how things are changing as we are going through the pandemic. And we've gotten through it a little bit further than where we are now. I think that we'll see that things are going to evolve. So again, thank you very, very much for your participation. And I also wanted to mention that we do have some resources on the Better Scientific Software site. They're listed here for you. And also we encourage your contributions. So please think about contributing to BSSW and taking a look at our site for more resources on software productivity. So JJ, Mark, Mahantesh, Angela, and Axel, thank you so much again. We will see you next time. I appreciate it. Bye, everybody. Thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very welcome.